Hello and welcome everyone to the Intrepid Museum's live virtual programming. My name's Alicia and I'll be your host. Just as a reminder, the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum's live streams are free, but if you'd like to support us in delivering cool programs just like this one, please click on the link in the comments or the description. So everyone, welcome to our program today. Feel free to use the chat, say hello, let us know where you're tuning in from, let us know maybe if you've ever been to the Intrepid Museum before, or if you plan on visiting us sometime soon, maybe. And also, hey, in the spirit of Halloween, if you're planning on dressing up this year, I'd love to know what you are going to be. So as you can see, I've got my witch's hat on here today for you. And everyone, I just have to say, I love Halloween. It is definitely one of my all-time favorite holidays. I love the spooky vibe, the scary stories. I love dressing up, and I'm sure I'm not alone out there. So today's program, everyone, is something really special, and it is actually going to be called Spooky Space. Clever how I did that, right? And everyone, every October, it's spooky season. So why not? We love being scared. We tell ghost stories on dark nights. We're huddled around campfires. We dress up in some amazing costumes. We go trick-or-treating. Sometimes we go to spooky haunted houses where, hidden monsters jump out at you. We watch scary movies. And even our own neighborhoods get transformed with lots of fun decorations sometimes. But have you ever paused to wonder how old Halloween is, or why people wear costumes and look like skeletons and ghosts? Or why do people bob for apples, right? Or go trick-or-treating? And also, what does any of this have to do with space or the Intrepid for that matter? Well, first of all, for those of you who may not be familiar, this is the Intrepid Museum. We are located in a historic aircraft carrier, the USS Intrepid. It served from World War II through the Vietnam War. But in particular, during the space race in the 1960s, the Intrepid also played a very important role in retrieving astronauts and their capsules after they splashed down into the ocean from outer space. So we picked up 2 NASA capsules, once during the Mercury program and once during the Gemini program. And we also have a space shuttle on board at our museum today as well to connect our space history to more modern day history too. So we do love to talk about space at our museum, of course. But back to Halloween. So the origins of the holiday fascinate both historians and astronomers because, believe it or not, Halloween is an astronomical holiday. Now, to understand how astronomical events actually influenced Halloween and to learn more about the beginnings of a lot of the traditions that we celebrate today, we first have to look at the lands where Halloween originated. So, everyone, the lands where you can see here, these lands here, this is things we're looking at are Ireland and Scotland and Wales. Now, many of the customs that we associate with Halloween began right here. Now, the people that lived in this region over 2,000 years ago were called the Celts, and they were these coastal tribal people who were related primarily by their languages, but their land stretched all across Europe. You had Ireland in the west, all the way, down through modern day Spain and France, also across to Switzerland, even Austria and Turkey in the east. So, what were the Celtic people like, and what was important to them is something else that we can look at. Well, if we actually want to learn a lot more about their beliefs and their traditions, you can look at mythology and folklore. So, Irish lore tells us that the Celts had 4 major festivals throughout the year. And of those 4, the most frequently mentioned in myths was one that was held around October 31st, when we now celebrate Halloween. But the Celts didn't call it Halloween back then. Instead, they called it Samhain. All right. Now, when it's spelled out there, I know it does kind of look like the word Sam Hain there, but that's actually pronounced Samhain in their language. Now, today, we see that our Halloween activities are shaped by a lot of these Samhain festivities. But Halloween more directly actually stems from the comparatively more recent holiday, All Saints' Day, or All Hallows' Day. Now, this is the Roman Catholic holy day that's held on November 1st, and it was created to remember and honor all of the saints, so whether they're known or unknown. Now, the night before All Hallows Day, so All Hallows evening or eve, you see where I'm getting with this, just like we've got Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve. Well, that night became known as All Hallows Eve, which eventually was shortened to Halloween. Now, both of the celebrations, though, Samhain and All Hallows Eve, were held around the same time of year. But these actually weren't the only festivals that were held during this time around the world. So, if you look over to India, we actually find two Hindu celebrations that suggest Samhain itself might have roots even further back in time because there's a lot of similarities between them. Now, the most prominent Hindu festival is called Diwali, and it's celebrated during the new moon phase that's closest to the beginning of November. And during this festival, people decorate their homes with lamps and candles, and sweets are shared with friends and neighbors. And it's kind of similar, if you think about it, to Halloween. We have jack o' lanterns that we light up, and of course, we go trick or treating. Also in South India and its neighboring countries, there's a festival called Themathi, which is the fire walking festival. And people walk barefoot across a 9-foot pit of these hot embers. And it's to honor an important character in the Hindu epic Mahabharata. And that character proved her purity by walking across a very similar bed of fire. So, looking at all of these similarities, you might wonder why was this time of year so significant to so many different cultures? And how is it that all of these civilizations that seem to be so isolated from one another all around the world, why is it that they're all even celebrated kind of in a similar way? Well, if we take a look a little bit closer at the people who celebrated Samhain, we know that they were a community primarily supported by agriculture. They were farmers. And with Samhain as one of their four main festivals on their calendar, it helped to divide the agricultural year into seasons. So, in addition to being a festival, it also marked the beginning of winter. And actually, the word Samhain means summer's end. So it's during this time, of course, crops and hay were brought in from the fields and, of course, stored for winter. And then they'd bring their herds and their flocks also back in from the pastures. So Samhain marked the end of the harvest, which, of course, means that it was a time for feasting. Now, today around the world, we still divide the year, of course, into seasons. And this is done by splitting it into 4 quarters using the shortest and the longest days of the year and what we call solstices, as well as, of course, the dates that fall midway between them, the equinoxes, as their dividers. Now, astronomically, and actually, as you can see by looking at this picture, the changes that we see in the movement of the sun's path across the sky, as well as, of course, the changes that we feel in the weather, happen because of something that we can really see here too, the Earth's tilt. Now, for the northern hemisphere, that means those who live above the equator. As the Earth orbits around the sun, all right, it's going around the sun throughout the year, it's always going to have that slight tilt to it. So it's going to tilt towards the sun on the summer solstice. So you can see that on the left there. It's going to be really hot. And then it's also going to tilt away from the sun on the winter solstice that you can see on the right. And that means, of course, you're going to be a little bit colder. And then it's actually going to be pretty even on the equinoxes. So you're going to have equal sun across both northern and southern hemispheres on those particular dates. But everyone, before the 1700s, and still to many people in Europe today, the seasons didn't start on the solstices or the equinoxes, but rather midway in between them. All right. Now, this is something called a cross-quarter day. So to those people, the summer solstice, so the day with the most sunlight in the year, it wasn't at the beginning of summer. It happened right in the middle of summer. And so the winter solstice, of course, the day with the least amount of sunlight would be right in the middle of winter. So it's actually the dates in between those 4 instances, those cross-quarter days, that were the true beginnings of the seasons to them. And so Samhain, which falls on the summer's end and the winter's beginning, well, that's a cross-quarter day. And it's kind of interesting that another Celtic cross-quarter day called Imbolc in February, so that marks the beginning of spring, that also aligns with Groundhog's Day, where here in the Western world, of course, we let a groundhog decide if spring will start or not, depending on if he sees his shadow. So everyone, that is a little bit of a recap there of why actually we celebrate Halloween when it is we do. And I know it can be a little bit difficult to wrap your head around, but you can kind of think of it how, during the summer, the sunlight in our days, right, they're a lot longer. and it gets darker later at night as a result, versus the idea that, in winter, we've got less sunlight, and so it gets dark a little earlier. And also things like daylight savings time. That was created for this very reason as well. We move our clocks forward and backwards to allow farmers to have more time to work in their fields. Daylight savings, saving daylight to work. Daylight savings time also aligns with those cross-quarter days too. So don't forget to turn your clocks back 1 hour. Remember, spring ahead and fall back when it is daylight savings time again, which I think is coming up in just a couple of weeks. Now, after the introduction of Christianity, though, into Ireland, which was sometime before the 5th century, the Roman calendar was widely adopted. And so they took all those cross-quarter celebrations and they moved them to the beginning of their nearest month. So in the case of Samhain, that meant November 1st. But in Celtic society, the days were actually counted from sunset. So Samhain technically would have started on sundown on October 31st, Halloween. So there you go. That's where it comes from. So the fact that Samhain was chosen to take place on an astronomical occurrence, a cross-quarter day, it was not a coincidence. But even more so to the Celts, this time, all right, between the seasons was a really special time, and their traditions reflected that. So they believed that this was a time in our year where the barrier between our worlds and the world of the dead was weakened, and the souls of the past could return to the land of the living. So it was a night of magic and games and costumes. And now, of course, the costumes would have differed a little slightly to those that we see out there today. No one was dressed up like Spider-Man or a pirate or an Instagram filter or something. They believed, though, that it wasn't just the spirits of the dead who returned, but also other spirits. So old gods and fairies and animal spirits who were looking for souls to carry back with them to the other world. So if you pretended to be one of those roaming spirits, wandering around, maybe dressing up like a ghost or an animal, they might let you walk by unharmed, and they might actually even be frightened of you. And that's actually where our costuming tradition comes from as well. Now, another way that Celts tried to ward off the evil spirits was to carve faces in large hollowed out turnips, those white root vegetables. That's probably not what you were expecting me to say. But of course, we do still continue to do that today, but with pumpkins. Now, we turn our pumpkins, of course, into jack-o'-lanterns. We put scary faces on them. We put all sorts of things on them. But people would also set out food by their fireplaces for when spirits of their ancestors returned to make them feel welcome, or even leave food out on their doorsteps to try to appease the evil spirits and make them go away. And that, as you can probably guess, is eventually what became what we now know as trick-or-treating. But this time of year, it didn't just offer a view into the other world and all of those, spooky spirits out there. It also opened up a window to the future. So Samhain also marked the end of their year cycle, and people were eager to know what the new year had in store for them. Hopefully good things. So some of our traditional Halloween games, like bobbing for apples, originated with this desire of trying to predict the future. So those people who were lucky enough to maybe get an apple in their mouth, or maybe even find a coin at the bottom of the tub of water, might be able to look forward to perhaps a prosperous new year. Now, we have learned through myths that Celtic beliefs revolved around a lot of these repeating cycles of the year, right? So how could they predict those cycles? How did they know when it was time to celebrate Samhain, other than it just getting a little bit colder outside or noticing, the sun in a different place? Because their calendars weren't always accurate, and the weather, of course, was unpredictable. So like many other cultures, again, they looked up, they looked to the sky. Now, the exact day on a calendar that Samhain was celebrated would have changed from year to year. It was most likely based on the phase of the moon, actually, because that was an easy way of measuring the passing of time, since one cycle of the moon is about 1 month long. But remember also that the path of the sun across the sky depends a lot on the time of year. Well, the Celts and other civilizations noticed those cycles, and they even built monuments to them. So these monuments were aligned with the solar motions, and so they had these giant stone circles. And of course, one of the most popular stone circles is this one right here, Stonehenge in England. This was built about 5,000 years ago, and so that actually makes it older than all of the pyramids in Egypt even. But by comparing the location of the sun on the horizon to these very strategically placed stones, someone could tell whether it was a solstice, so one of the longest or shortest days of the year. They could tell if it was an equinox, so one of the days with equal day and night. They could tell if it was one of the cross quarter days in between those points that we just talked about, or one of the many, many other celestial events that they also kept track of. But there was also now another way to know that it was time to celebrate Samhain. Instead of recognizing the sun's location, they might have also looked at the stars. And in particular, a small grouping of stars called the Pleiades. Now, this is located right near the constellation of Orion, the hunter. And if you can find Orion, you can pretty easily find the Pleiades nearby. So looking at this picture here, can you all find Orion in the sky? Might be a little bit tricky there for you, but of course, if you know what to look for, you might see it. But I'll go ahead and make it easier for you anyway. So there it is. And now you can also see superimposed on those stars the images of those constellations overlaid. So you can look for Orion around this time of year in the eastern sky on Halloween, right above the horizon, so where the sky meets the ground. And he kind of looks like a stick figure, all right? He's got 2 stars that are his shoulders. He's got 3 stars, probably what you were looking for before, that make up his waist or his very famous belt, Orion's belt, and 2 for his feet or his knees. Now, in order to find the Pleiades in particular, you can use Orion's belt. So you just connect the 3 stars with an imaginary line and follow it away from the ground until you reach a tiny cluster of stars. And that's the Pleiades. Now, it is said that the Celts knew to celebrate on the night that the Pleiades climbed to its highest point in the sky at midnight, or they might have also looked for it rising in the east, just as the sun would be setting in the west. But in either case, both of these sightings of the Pleiades just so happened to be around the same date as the cross quarter day. So if they saw the Pleiades in that spot, they knew it was time for the harvest and it was time to celebrate Samhain. Now, today, Halloween is fixed on October 31st, if you didn't know, even though today the Pleiades cluster does not actually reach that spot at midnight until, don't tell anyone, a month later, November 21st. And that's actually because the Earth, it does wobble very slightly over the course of thousands of years. So things in the night sky appear slightly different than they used to, but that is perfectly normal. Now, about the Pleiades, though, the Celts may have associated the Pleiades cluster there with sorrow and mourning because to them it kind of looked like teardrops in the sky. And when observing that cluster, the Celts could maybe actually only see about 7 bright stars, which is probably also why the Greeks referred to it commonly as the 7 sisters. Now, Native American tribes near Wyoming also see it as 7 girls who, in their story, were rescued from a pack of bears while they were playing in a stream. And they prayed up above, and the giant rock, a giant rock formation, sprung up. It's actually now called Devil's Tower in the Black Hills there. It sprung up from the ground, and it put them up there in order to save them. There's also another funny story, actually, though, that native tribes in California tell. They say that it represents a group of wives who loved to eat onions so much. They ate them all the time, so much so that their husbands thought it was just disgusting and kicked them out of their homes because they smelled so bad. But who doesn't love onions, right? Come on. Now, if you take a look, though, a little bit closer at the Pleiades, everyone, wow, right? You'll realize it's more than just 7 stars. And with a really, really good telescope, you can see it's actually a cluster of over 1,000 stars. Now, they all stay in a group bound by gravity as they travel together through the Milky Way galaxy, and they shine blue because they are extremely hot. They are about 23,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That is over twice the temperature of the surface of the sun. But little did the Celts know that right nearby the Pleiades, there's actually also another eerie blue object in space. It is actually also right by the star Rigel in Orion, which happens to be another blue star in our galaxy. Now, this region here, it's got a cloud of gas and dust called a nebula. And this one in particular kind of reminds people of a character that we now associate with Halloween. So take a close look out there. Let me know in the chat, does anyone happen to see a shape in this cloud? Tell me in the chat what you think it might look like. What do you see here? And again, remember, it's something kind of Halloween-y, maybe kind of like a side profile of something. I don't know, maybe my hat might be a little bit of a hint there for you. If you look closely at this, everyone, this actually is called the Witch Head Nebula. There you go, Vashsin, the witch, yes. So this is the Witch Head Nebula because it looks like a witch's head. And everyone, check this out. Yes. So now you can really see it a bit better, right? So there's her eye, her nose, her lips, her pointy chin, maybe a big wart on that chin, and a pointed hat. It looks like the Wicked Witch of the West. Yes, it does. Now, astronomers call this a reflection nebula because it reflects Rigel's starlight to the Earth, and that's why we see it as blue. And so, everyone, it's not only the blue light of the star. There's actually more to it. This nebula has dust grains in it that reflect blue light better than other colors, like red light, for example. So, kind of like how our daytime sky looks blue most of the time because the molecules in our atmosphere just happen to scatter blue light really well. Those dust grains actually scatter blue light really well too. So that's our Witch Head Nebula. Very spooky, very appropriate for this time of year. Now, here's another one, everyone. Let me know in the chat what this kind of looks like to you. We're going to play a little game here with some nebulas. What does this nebula look like to you? Also kind of a spooky sight. Tell me in the chat what you think it looks like. This one actually is so big that it spans over 2 light years across. And that means it takes the light that hits it 2 years to travel from one side of it to the other. Very big, very spooky here. Actually, I see a few things in this one, but I'm curious what you all think. This one is called the Ghost Nebula. And it's called that because if you look at it, it kind of looks like there's ghosts rising out of it, out of the clouds, out of the gas there, right? Kind of haunting the nearby space there. You can kind of see maybe some arms, like on the left there, I see some people kind of reaching up and out of it on the left there, and in the middle, kind of something else coming out. And I see in the chat, maybe an octopus ghost, kind of an octopus with all those arms. Exactly, exactly. So this nebula is actually lit by stars that are just starting to take shape, and they may actually form new clusters of stars, just like the Pleiades someday. And it's the effects of this star formation that give the Ghost Nebula its shape, which is actually really, really appropriate because nebula are actually ghostly remnants of dying stars. So they're these expanding, gas and dust shells with these enormous, billowing kind of rings that come out of them that are basically celestial ghosts. So very fitting there. But there's actually even more spooky nebula in space, some that we can't even see here in North America, in the Northern Hemisphere either, kind of like this one. So what does this look like to you, everyone? What do you think? A little creepy here. Certainly want to see something like this creeping around my house. What do you think? Kind of cool. Got this long kind of red things coming out of it. It's funny you're just saying octopus. It kind of does look like that too, but maybe something else that's got some legs that are long. This one is called, oh yeah, nice, a demonic eye or a spider maybe. Exactly, Dream of Storm. Yes. So this is called the Black Widow Nebula. Very fitting, a spider. Yes, yes. And so in the middle region of the spider's body, there's actually these yellow specks. All right, those are baby stars. During formation, those stars give off a lot of solar winds. So they are streams of charged particles that blow the surrounding gas outward, and they form bubbles and cavities. And 2 big cavities were formed on either side of the new stars. And that's what gave it that kind of spider-like shape with those legs extending out on either side. Cool, right? Now, this one can only be seen from the southern hemisphere. So that's below the equator in places like South America and Australia. Maybe appropriate because, down in Australia, I'm sure they've got some super terrifying spiders that can kill you. But this one in particular is inside of the constellation Cercinus, which is the Mariner's Compass, which is also a constellation that you can only see down there because of its location. But everyone, it's not just nebula that give us haunting depictions in space. When astronomers look deep into the unknown, they don't typically expect to find something staring back at them. But in these next ones, that's exactly what they saw. So take a look at this one. Whoa! So this is a Hubble image. This was taken in 2019. And in it, we can kind of see an uncanny pair of glowing eyes staring menacingly at us, right? But those eyes are actually, those are the most prominent feature of what kind of, to me, it kind of looks like a face of maybe a creature or a skeleton, right? This is actually an image of two distant galaxies that are colliding with one another about 700 million light years away. Cool, right? So each eye is the bright core of an entire galaxy that has slammed into another one. The outline of that face is actually a ring of young blue stars. And then other clumps of newer stars are the things that give it kind of its nose and its mouth shape, too. But everyone, that head-on collision, that actually gives galaxies their ring structure like that for about 100 million years, which is a pretty rare occurrence, specifically because of the way they collide, their positioning while that's happening. And although it is pretty common for galaxies to collide with one another, most of them are not head-on smash-ups, just like this one. So this is actually a pretty rare treat. And then, in about 1 or 2 billion years, give or take, the two galaxies will fully merge into one thing there. Don't worry, everyone. Our home galaxy, the Milky Way, is not planning to collide with our closest neighboring galaxy, Andromeda, for another about 4.5 billion years. So we're pretty good for a while on that one. But everyone, take a look at this picture here. Tell me what you see here. Again, kind of a little appropriate for Halloween time. What do you think? Oh, someone said that last one looked like an alien face. Ooh, spooky. Nice. A cyclops. Cool. What do you think this one looks like, though? So this is an image from 2014. NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory captured this. This was an ultraviolet image that they took of none other than our very own sun. So, oh yes, a pumpkin, the pumpkin, excellent. So this shows active regions as much brighter because those areas do give off more light and energy, as it also does mark some the magnetic fields there too that are hovering around the sun's atmosphere called the corona. But this particular image blends together two sets of extreme ultraviolet wavelengths that are taken, of course, by the Hubble Space Telescope. They're typically colorized in gold and yellow, and it actually does really kind of create a spooky jack-o'-lantern pumpkin face, right? A spooky face just in time for Halloween. And KJNY says, Jack from Nightmare Before Christmas. Love that. Love that. It does, right? Now, we've looked at a lot of really kind of, interesting spooky nebula out there. Who knows what kind of beliefs and stories the Celts might have had if they could have seen all of these amazing things that we can see thanks to technology and space today. There is just so much more than just the cycles of the year, just the changing of the seasons, and, just the stars we can see with the naked eye. But we are just discovering more and more every single day. And in fact, in the coming months, everyone, we are going to be launching the James Webb Telescope, which is going to let us see even more, even further, just amazing, cool images out there, even further in space, distant, further nebula and galaxies, giving us even more answers about the origins of our universe. And who knows what else we might find out there. But that leads me now to some other spooky space stories that I would like to tell you about today. Now, this is an eerie picture. I just like to show this because it does kind of, I don't know, it just looks a little creepy to me. I wouldn't like to be coming down the hall and see this. This is a picture aboard the International Space Station. This is their extravehicular suits when not in use. So imagine floating by that corridor at night when everyone's sleeping and kind of looking to the side, seeing that through the doorway. Whoa, that would creep me out just a little bit. But of course, don't forget, in space, no one can hear you scream, right? So, space, everyone, is the ultimate unknown for us. And for most of human history, really until about, 60 years ago, humans had no idea what to expect up in space. And we've really only just scratched the surface of what we do know right now. But you add to that, we're still figuring out a lot of unexplained phenomena here on Earth, anyway, too. So, there's a lot that we still don't know and can't explain away with science. Right? So it is neat to find images of things that we recognize up in the stars, but what about some creepy, unexplained phenomena that have been witnessed by astronauts themselves? So I'm going to tell you some spooky stories from astronauts that both they and NASA still can't entirely explain. We may never know the answers to some of these stories, so it is the perfect spooky space Halloween treat for you. So here we go, everyone. So first, let's talk about what Yang Liwei experienced. All right. So this was back in 2003. He became the first Chinese person in space, and it was a very historic occasion. But it also became famous for something else really creepy that happened to him. So on the night of October 16th, he heard a strange knocking sound on his ship. He described it as someone knocking the body of the spaceship just as a knocking an iron bucket or a wooden hammer. Now, it neither came from outside nor inside the spaceship. It was as though someone was knocking, asking to be let in, and he was terrified. He tried to peek outside the porthole, but he couldn't see anything outside. And when he came back to Earth, he tried to describe the sound to experts, but nobody could identify it. Now, remember, there's no air, right, for sound waves to move outside in a vacuum of space. So it had to have somehow been inside his small spaceship. And some say it might have maybe been space debris floating around. But what's even stranger is that there were some other Chinese astronauts later, between 2005 and 2008, who also reported hearing similar sounds. And to this day, no one knows what that knocking was. All right, now here's actually another creepy noise in space story. In 1969, Tom Stafford, Gene Cernan, and John Young, the very same that we picked up from Gemini 3, went to the far side of the moon on the Apollo 10 mission. Now, this was the final test before Apollo 11 that, of course, ultimately landed humans on the surface of the moon. But during that mission, the astronauts tested various equipment and they took photographs of the lunar surface. And of course, the stakes were really high because they didn't, it wasn't a simulation. This was real space. They wanted to make sure everything was all set and ready to go for that next important launch. But while they were working, they started to hear some strange sounds. They heard a whistling sound on their headphones that they actually described as space music. And this went on for a full hour. So I'm going to play for you now, everyone, some actual audio of them talking about the weird sounds and music maybe that they were hearing while they were in their capsule. And now keep in mind that there's going to be kind of a consistent hum behind it that you'll hear in this audio. That's from their capsule, but they're hearing something entirely different on their headsets. So here we go.
That music even sounds outer spacey, doesn't it? You hear that? That whistling sound? Yeah. Woo! Look at your... Yeah, it sounds like, outer space type music. Heading out here, weary, John? Boy, that sure is weird music. No. It's a whistling, like an outer space type thing.
What do you think? So again, this went on for about an hour and they made numerous references to it. You just heard some of that audio. He is on record there as saying, boy, that sure is weird music. We're going to have to find out about that. And John Young says, nobody will believe us. Well, that's what happened. In fact, they didn't talk about it to anyone because it was such a high stakes mission and they didn't want to risk not being seen as fit to fly again if no one believed them. Now, Michael Collins, the command module pilot for Apollo 11, is actually on record as having said that based on their experience, he was told to expect the noise while he made that trip alone. And he also said he was really grateful to have been told ahead of time because it would have definitely scared him. Now, the leading theory is that the sound came from radio interference between spacecrafts of the command module and the lunar module. They were separate at the time. However, you might think that those three very seasoned astronauts might have known the difference between radio interference and this more what they called, again, space music. So who knows what that was? Kind of interesting though, right? Now, here is another one. Here we go. Let me add that back. Here we go. All right. So in 1994, retired NASA astronaut Dr. Story Musgrave, who's a very well-respected, very well-educated man. He has 6 academic degrees. He is also a licensed physician and mathematician and a veteran of the Marine Corps. He gave an interview where he described an unexplained experience that shook him to his core. He said, on 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I have seen a snake out there. 6, 7, 8 feet long. It's rubbery because it has internal waves of it, and it follows you for a rather long period of time. What? Now, rather than get freaked out by it, though, a scientist, Musgrave picked up a camera and he started to film it. And as you can guess, here it comes. This is the footage from one of those experiences. So here we go. Check this out. Now, it is a little blurry. Again, this was a while ago, 94. But keep your eye on it and look for something moving. And eventually you'll be able to see it and it'll get a little bit closer. Always kind of fun to watch this. You'll see something, I can kind of see it, kind of in the center right. Okay, now we're zooming in on it. You see this thing kind of flailing around. It's very bizarre looking. You don't expect to see it. A lot of people think maybe, debris or something, but look the way it's wiggling there. I'm seeing some funny reactions in the chat right now. What is this? Interesting. Yeah, so that's what he described as this snake. And again, he saw it on numerous occasions. No idea, but that is Story Musgrave's space snake. So everyone, he actually said the more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there. And that sort of thing brings to you a certainty that there are other living creatures out there. Maybe space snakes. But when asked exactly what he believed might be out there, he said, yeah, living creatures, far more developed as civilizations. They've been around for 100 million years, and we can't even conceive how advanced they are and the kinds of things that they're doing. So, snakes in space, I guess. Why not? Interesting video, though, right? I'm really glad he decided to video that because I'm very curious what that is. Now, here's another story. On May 5th, 1981, Soviet cosmonaut Major General Vladimir Kovalyunov looked out of a porthole of his Salyut orbital space station and saw something completely inexplicable to him. So he later described what he saw at a Moscow press conference when he came back to Earth. He said, many cosmonauts have seen phenomena which are far beyond the experiences of Earthmen. For 10 years, I never spoke on such things. At that time, we were over the area of South Africa, moving towards the area of the Indian Ocean. I just made some gymnastics exercises when I saw in front of me through a porthole an object which I could not explain. I saw this object and then something happened, something impossible according to the laws of physics. The object had this shape, elliptical, and it flew with us. From a frontal view, it looked like it would rotate in flight direction. It only flew straight, but then a kind of explosion happened. Very beautiful to watch, of golden light. This was the first part. Then 1 or 2 seconds later, a second explosion followed somewhere else, and 2 spheres appeared, golden and very beautiful. After this explosion, I just saw white smoke and then a cloud-like sphere. We flew eastwards, and then when we entered the darkness of the Earth's shadow, I could not see them any longer. The 2 spheres never returned. Now, there have rarely been descriptions so detailed, and many believe his encounter actually might be proof of extraterrestrial life. But who knows? Now, let me ask you, everyone, what is scarier, perhaps, than spotting one UFO? How about a whole fleet of UFOs? So in 2005, American astronaut Leroy Chiao was the commander of the International Space Station for 6.5 months. And while installing antennas 230 miles above the Earth, he witnessed something that he also has yet to understand. He, along with his crew, saw a set of strange lights in space. So he said, I saw some lights that seemed to be in a line, and it was almost like an upside down check mark. I saw them fly by and thought it was awfully strange. Some people theorize that those lights were, simply a fishing boat, maybe hundreds of miles down, that were, shooting their lights upward. But Chiao said that he never implied that there was some alien creatures that were attempting to make contact or had anything to do with that. But he did note that it would be pretty silly to believe that we were alone. So who knows what those were? Likewise, astronaut Gordon Cooper, the astronaut who flew on both Mercury 9 and Gemini 5, also claimed to have seen an entire fleet of UFOs around the time that he flew for the Air Force. Now, he described this as a vast armada of UFOs flying in formation at extremely high altitudes. But that wasn't his only encounter. A decade later, in May of 1963, Cooper shot into space aboard a Mercury capsule for a trip around the world. And on his final orbit, while passing over Perth, Australia, he noticed a glowing green object jolt toward him at high speed. And at first, he thought maybe he was just imagining it, but the object was real. And it was even picked up on radar by a tracking station in Western Australia. So Cooper immediately reported the incident, of course, to NBC News, but was later approached by reporters who told him that they had been instructed to not question him about the sighting. So, was there something there? Was there a cover-up? Who knows? So everyone, this is just a handful of the spooky, unexplained stories from astronauts about things they can't explain. What was all of that? Are there scientific explanations for everything that I just told you? Or do aliens exist? Or do snakes exist in space? I don't know. But if they do, well, do we actually have to be afraid of them? Just because something's unknown or unexplained doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad or even, some scary monster that's coming to get you. And NASA knows that better than anyone, though they certainly, of course, don't want to cause any rumors or let conspiracy theories, get around and get out of hand. But so, we may never know the answers to some of those questions, but they are certainly interesting to learn about and lead to so many more unanswered questions, which ultimately is what science is all about anyway, right? So the spirit of adventure and the unknown and Halloween has always been about looking into the unknown. So this year on Halloween, everyone, if you do happen to go outside, look up at the night sky and remember some of these spooky stories. Think about these nebulous ghosts and witches and spiders in distant galaxies, and maybe even see if you can connect the dots up in the sky to create your own scary creatures as well. And while you're doing that, remember that you will be looking up at the same stars that our ancient ancestors saw many centuries ago. So, my friends, that brings us to the end of our program today. Ooh, someone says I've got goosebumps. Excellent. So everyone, if you've got any questions about this or other programs, you can reach out to us through our website, intrepidmuseum.org, or also through social media. I would like to thank you all so much for watching today and sharing your fabulous comments and observations. Excellent. The museum, of course, hosts a number of live streams, so please do follow and subscribe to this channel and visit our website for the latest streaming schedule. Also, if you enjoyed this or any of our past programs, we would love your feedback as well. So there is a link that you can click on in the chat to answer a few questions for us. Now, our next program is going to be Thursday next week at 3 p.m. It's going to be Flying in Style, where we are going to talk about some of the artwork and the symbols that you can find on planes and how they help to identify them and kind of unite them as a team. So again, that's next week, Thursday at 3 p.m. right here on our streaming platforms. Also, as a reminder, everyone, the Intrepid Museum's open to the public 7 days a week from 10 to 5 p.m. So if you happen to be in the area, come on by and say hello. Otherwise, we hope to see you online for another virtual Intrepid adventure. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next time. And of course, happy Halloween.